Okay, everyone, to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a special review for you of another Marine Master 200 variation. This one being the Save the Ocean 1300 piece limited edition in Ever Brilliant Steel. And I have to say, I'm very excited to feature this one. I actually brought in my own personal Marine Master reduced Prospex model just so you guys could compare and contrast, because there are some differences in terms of the level of finish as well as the use of materials. So we can take a look at, comparing it to the standard steel with the hard coating on there, the Dia Shield, versus uncoated Ever Brilliant Steel. So, and then also, of course, very similar in terms of the colorways, very similar in terms of the design language. These are both modern reinterpretations of the original 1968 Marine Master diver. And I think these are really great improvements over that original design as it's kind of evolved over the years. But big shout out to Belmont Watches for lending in this beautiful SLA055, which is actually the international nomenclature. Or if you were looking, if you're looking at this from a JDM perspective, the Japanese domestic market nomenclature would be the SBDX049. So with all that said, let's go ahead and zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, as you can see, before we jump in, there is also this included Seiko style strap. These are actually quite expensive if you were to try to source them separately. So it's nice to see that included within the package if you buy this from Belmont. Very nice. It actually looks pretty unused. I have to say, from an execution standpoint, from a material standpoint, these are actually some of the finest types of fabric straps you can get. I will say, unfortunately for me, they are a bit thick, especially when you're pairing it to something like a dive watch, but everyone's different. So you may love that. And if you are looking forward to wearing it on this strap, I will say it is super soft, very, very well done. As you can see up close, the fabric, the stitch on it is really beautiful, and it just plays with the light. So very, very high quality, nicely signed hardware. This thing quite brilliant. Even has multiple finishes on that buckle, and you can see it's all milled to include that finger there. So very, very nice, very solid, and something I did want to show before we dove in. Now, a little bit about Seiko. They were founded back in 1881. They're Japanese in origin and have factories throughout Asia. They cover all market segments from entry level to high end, and this is kind of a broad spectrum of the same aesthetic, but placed within kind of the entry versus the higher end. Although these are both premium products, even my SBDC Marine Master Reduced, the SPB187, is actually still quite expensive at full list price of $1,200, although you can get them for a lot cheaper now because they've been out for a while and there's still an abundance of stock and inventory available, versus this SLA at 4,600, with the newest correction in terms of pricing, but you can actually get this particular unit from Belmont Watches for 3,100 in San Diego. I've purchased from them in the past, and I'm sure once I start selling, I'll sell through them as well at some point. So very, very nice. But let's go ahead and get this piece in hand for a closer look. Check that out, guys. This is a real stunner. So the dimensions on here are 42.6 millimeters in diameter, 13 millimeters thick, 49.2 millimeters lug to lug, full Ever Brilliant steel, brushed with Zaratsu polishing. So you guys can see that polishing. This is not a brand new watch, but I will say that polishing is fantastic. Look at the distortion free mirror like finish. It is very, very nice. And the nice thing is about when you purchase something like this that's already been worn, you don't have to worry about being the first person to get the little scrape, the little smudge here and there. You can pretty much wear it the way it was intended to be worn, being a very capable piece. So, and then in terms of the price point, the reason why these, of course, are stepped up in price is mainly because of that movement. This puts it in a different league with the 8L35 movement. It has a 50-hour power reserve, 4 hertz beat rate, and it has a better tolerance at minus 10 to plus 15 seconds a day. But the main thing is that it's kind of this older version of the 9S movement, which is a Grand Seiko movement. So you can think of this as kind of an under-regulated, also under-spec'd version, undecorated kind of Grand Seiko level movement. And it's a very, very nice solid movement. You can see it has a beautiful 4 hertz sweep there. So you're getting 8 ticks per second. One thing you'll also notice is the beautifully capped second sand stack there on the second hand. Look at that. Boom. I love the cap. I have that cap on my personal Grand Seiko GMT, and I just love that. It's such a beautiful touch, and that's what really, that, and then also the use of the ever brilliant steel. It really makes you categorize this at a higher level. Although, yes, it is a Seiko Prospex dive watch. This is something that's very, very special. It has a true heritage to, the dive watches of yesteryear. This isn't some homage. This is Seiko design language reproduced by Seiko and put into a really beautiful package here. The Sapphire has the dual curve on it, so curved on the outside, curved on the underside, so you can see at harsh angles, still going to be quite legible, with really only the distortion being at the far reaches of that crystal. And the crystal itself flows beautifully in the same fashion that the bezel flows. That's a big difference between here, this model, where it's going to be flat in the bezel, flat in the crystal. Definitely a lot simpler setup, and you can see a lot simpler finishing there. Although it is still quite nice, it is not quite to the same level, whether it be down to the grips and the tactile engagement. Guys, check out this bezel action. Ooh, just buttery smooth with beautiful tactile clicks still rendering through. And that's like a real hallmark of Seiko. They definitely are on the smoother side versus the clickier side, but this one does a really beautiful job, and you can see very little play, just a tiny shred, but that little bit of play means that it gives you a little bit of play to line up your bezel pip as needed. So, and it does line up quite nicely versus here, of course, on the unlimited. Still very nice, don't get me wrong. Definitely come a long way from the SKX and Turtle bezel actions of the past, but not quite comparable. Also, you can see this has a lacquered steel insert that is going to kind of mimic the look of a ceramic insert, while this one will actually be utilizing a ceramic bezel insert, and it does look quite fantastic. And then also the grips, this feels more luxury pretty much on every level when you look at it, when you feel this versus this one. Although this one feels more like a user, a wear, doesn't feel as special. It definitely feels quite premium, but this definitely crosses into something that feels more luxurious. This feels something like a Grand Seiko feels. So for me, this feels more like a luxury timepiece versus this one being a very solid premium timepiece. So, but you guys got enough kind of close-ups there. You can see, obviously put it on that strap code Miltat Chaffle to get a bit of a similar comparison in terms of the aesthetic, but in terms of comparing quality, this model, the SLA model, really takes the cake, and it truly is finely, more finely executed in pretty much every single way versus this one. And this one is no slouch. It's a beautiful watch, and honestly, holding the two, it does make me appreciate the qualities of my little my SPB model, but at the end of the day, this one right here is just kind of wow. It is just next level. So let's get into some of the details here, guys. So you're getting raised indices which means in terms of legibility, being able to have a lot of lume in there, it's doing really, really well. That textured blue gradient dial, you do have the date kind of sandwiched in between the 4.5 there, which makes it nice and tucked away. Also, you do get, of course, the matching date disc, which blends it, so you're going to get white font over a black background to match with the other white font across the dial text there. Also, this is going to have a full diver's 200 meters of water resistance, which means that it meets or exceeds the ISO standards to carry that text. So this is a serious piece of kit from that perspective. It has 20 millimeter lugs. They are drilled. As you can see, very nicely done, which makes strap changes quite easy. Comes with this black silicone strap with that iconic chocolate bar pattern. For me, I think the strap itself is a little flat in terms of the coloring. The finish on it is more matted versus the rest of the watch is quite glossy. So I might swap that out to something that has a little bit more gloss to it, or something that's just a bit of a deeper black. I will say that the factory Seiko strap, although very, very comfortable, definitely has more of a matted, kind of muted finish to it. It does have a slight taper to 18 millimeters at this signed buckle, which is fantastically finished. Multi-finished. You can see it does have a nice fine bevel. Also, you have a blacked out metal keeper, so this is going to be definitely, you know, not standing out quite as much, which I know that can be a point of contention for some folks, where they feel like these metal keepers can kind of dominate. So nice to see a bit of a stealthier execution on this particular watch. So with that said, let's actually get this piece on wrist and see how it wears. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5 inch wrist, this thing wears just beautifully. Of course, if I take it and put it a little bit too close to the camera, you're going to get some lens distortion there. It's going to appear a little bit larger on wrist than it really is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my hand just a little bit more away from the camera, and I'm just going to tighten the shot up here so you can get a truer aspect ratio of how this might lay on your own wrist. And you can see it still is pretty well centered, and that lug to lug is definitely very, very manageable because of all of those beautiful tricks that Seiko employs on their cases. You can see the beautiful undercut that kind of goes over and just really thins out that little sliver of brushed section that's in between that beautiful top bevel. Very, very impressive. And man, that dial is absolutely gorgeous. Check the way it's just very subtly textured. And I think even in photos, you don't really notice the texture. You more so notice that gradation, that textured blue gradient colorway there, where it gets darker towards the edges of the dial. But then you also do have those icy blue accents as well, which I think really plays nicely, and it isn't always captured in photos, but I will say here it just renders really, really beautifully. So I have to say, very, very impressed on how this one lays, and it definitely has all those Marine Master vibes that you would get, you know, from previous iterations. This does by no means feels like a poor man's Marine Master variation. This absolutely feels like a very, very premium and upscale variant, and I'm curious to see if they would ever release one with an ever brilliant steel bracelet. It would probably increase the cost by a lot. I think there's only one Grand Seiko that's in regular production that offers an ever brilliant bracelet, so I don't know if they've done it for any sports watches, but I think this one does look absolutely fantastic on strap, so I won't be minding it too much, but I will say that this thing is quite gorgeous. So with that said, let's actually get this off the wrist, set up for some lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Yes, as you can see, this thing is glowing very, very brightly. It really knocks the pants off of anything in those, you know, $1,500 to $800 Seiko diver watches, and this is just pretty much next level. Again, this is top premium in terms of just the execution and the application of the lume. So very, very nice. But one thing I always do like to work in, of course, is some low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field, you know, getting direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to be coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, maybe just spending some time in your favorite automobile or hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to maybe include some high contrast lighting that could typically expose any type of production defects. But all you're going to see here is just how immaculate this thing is polished and brushed. Those textures, the way that they play, my goodness, the micro textures around those indices there, and the way that they capture light and reflect light, very, very impressive. And you can see even in with just a little bit of light, there's so much, although it isn't fully loomed on that bezel insert, it's still quite visible even with minimal lighting conditions. So very well done from that perspective, and you can see how uniform the brushing is as it just lasers right over those lugs. Really fantastic. That ever brilliant steel is definitely something to behold in person. So I recommend you guys get a look because it does have that brighter tone to it, and it definitely has quite a bit of extra luster. Again, really categorizing this more as a luxury diver than you would think from the brand. So I mean, obviously they do have more expensive dive watches that are directly within their LX range, which feel very, very overbuilt. What I like is the more refined and subdued approach, although it does have some nice color play, which makes it feel quite modern and thoughtful in terms of that execution. I will also say that the more restrained nature, for me, I really, really like. I like that it's not over the top. It's not too shouty. This is one that can easily be kind of a low-key grail while you're wearing it, or it could also be an extreme flex piece for those that recognize this design language, that recognize that beautifully sweeping seconds hand. The folks that know what's behind and what's inside of this watch case are really going to, they'll be the type of folks that'll be very, very impressed with this piece. While, some normal onlookers are just going to see something a little glossy, a little colorful, and think that's just the watch of somebody who cares about watches, right? So there's a lot to enjoy there. So closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, super wearable and screams quality. Definitely like Grand Seiko level in terms of that fit and finish. In terms of model variants, it also is available in a gilt motif, which would be the SLA057. This is the SLA055 with that nice blue setup. In terms of comparable models, you guys saw it, my Prospex SPB187 Marine Master 200 reduced. Those go for about $1,200, full list price. 42 millimeters versus the 42.6, 12.5 millimeters versus 13 millimeters thick, right? So it's going to be a little bit thinner, a little bit smaller, a little shorter lug to lug, 49.2 versus 48.7. And then, of course, the other one has standard steel, but it does have that Dia Shield hard coating, which does kind of remove some of that brightness, and it does give it a slightly darker tint when you do have the metals right there side by side. And then, of course, the movement, huge difference in the quality there, comparing a 4R35 versus the 8L35. So the 6R, whoa, I'm all over the place, 6R35, right? So the 6R35 has 70 hours of power reserve versus the 50 hours of power reserve, so a slightly more power reserve, but then the beat rate is only 3 hertz versus the 4 hertz sweep, right? So it's going to be 6 ticks a second versus 8 ticks per second, so much smoother sweep there, guys. And then for me, guys, bottom line, this is probably one of the most luxurious feeling divers I've ever experienced, to be completely honest. Like, this does not feel cheap. I wouldn't be like, if you told me that this was a watch that costed twice as much, this costed $8,000, it would be tough for me to argue with you, because it just feels that well put together. I'm just definitely very impressed by it. So you know, although it is expensive for a Seiko diver when you think of it within those terms, I think it's actually one of the cheapest luxury divers on the market, right? Because when you think about luxury divers, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about probably the most affordable luxury diver, and one of the most popular ones would be the Omega Seamaster Professional, right? And then it goes to, of course, even more money. You get to the Rolex Submariner, quite expensive. Blancpain 50 Fathoms. You're talking Glashütte Original. You know, once you start getting into those ranges of you know, real higher end luxury, that's 10 grand and above. So the fact that you can get, especially from Belmont watches, right, $3,100, you're getting something that would feel absolutely, you go to a watch meet and people are all taking off their dive watches. This is going to stand out as one of the more premium dive watches of a bunch, right? Like, this will absolutely hold its own thanks to that movement, thanks to that finishing, thanks to the choice of steel, proprietary steel. And then of course it's doing what Grand Seiko is known for, which is having the beautiful textured dials that are just applied with such finesse. So you think about that, and then it's also has all of the heritage and lineage of Seiko, you know, being a Seiko dive watch. There's definitely a lot that's going for it apart from just what's on the spec sheet. So with that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do it like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.